Have you ever achieved a dream only to find yourself questioning whether it's still the right dream for the next chapter of your life? That's exactly where we find ourselves today. Now, before we go any further, I think it's a good idea to acknowledge something. We know that this is very much a first world problem. We own a property in Spain, and we are debating whether to keep it or sell it. And we know that that's a position that many people would love to be in, and we absolutely don't take that for granted. In fact, we're really incredibly grateful to be having this conversation at all. But here's the thing. Sometimes the hardest decisions aren't between something good and bad. It could be two different versions of a really good life. So if you've watched the first two videos, you will know that that is exactly what the after party years is all about. It's about figuring out what comes next. Not simply accepting the future that arrives by default, but consciously designing a life and a next chapter while we're still healthy, active, interesting and able to make the most of it. And that's exactly where we find ourselves today, caught somewhere between the head and the heart. So when we bought this house, the vision seemed pretty straightforward. The plan was to spend roughly half our time in the UK, half our time here in Spain, a really lovely 50-50 life. As I said, first world problems. Best of both worlds, place in the sun, slower pace of life, future retirement base, and a dream that we worked really hard to achieve. It didn't fall into our laps, we worked for it. And honestly, we loved it and we continue to love it. We've owned this property for 10 years now, so that's a whole decade, which means this isn't a recent purchase that we're trying to justify. It's now a home. So we've lived the dream. We've experienced the reality of owning a place in Spain. We've seen the good bits, we've seen the less good bits. We've watched the seasons change while we've been here throughout the years. We've built routines, we've made memories, we've created traditions. And in many ways, this house represents our first vision of the after party years. Sunshine, simplicity, more time together, and a slower, more intentional way of living. And for 10 years, that's exactly what it's delivered. This isn't just a property, it's a whole chapter of our lives. So what's changed? Well, over the last 12 months or so, something has very much shifted. It's partly because of work commitments, being much heavier than we expected, and a change in the way that we're working, where we're more tied to a location than we ever were before. But life's been busy, and the reality is that in the last 12 months, certainly, we've spent less time here than we would have liked. But if we're honest, that's only part of the story. So the bigger change may actually be us. When we bought this place, the idea of freedom was having a home in the sun and having somewhere familiar to return to. A place to slow down, a place to spend more time. And that vision still appeals to both myself and to Michael. But lately, we've started asking ourselves a different question. And that question is, are we actually ready for that yet? So, as many of you will know, if you watched our very first video, we've talked about dreaming of backpacking and having adventures, particularly through Central and Southern America, and would really love to make a longer term trip to Japan. And that dream hasn't disappeared. If anything, it's become stronger. So the more we talk about early retirement, the more we realise that we're not done with having adventures, we're not done with seeing more of the world, and we're not done exploring and finding new places. As I said in video 1, there's a big old world out there to explore. There's cultures we want to immerse ourselves in, there's stories that we want to create, and there's challenges that we want to have. And the more we talk about our future, the more we realise we're not dreaming about stopping. We're dreaming about doing different things and having different experiences. And as I said before, seeing more of the world. So that means, I don't know, collecting stories instead of more possessions. In many ways, that's become one of our guiding principles behind the after party years. We don't want life to get smaller as we get older. We want it to get bigger, and that's where the dilemma starts. So why is that a dilemma? Well, because when you own a second home, there's a natural pull to keep coming back. It's obvious, right? It's all yours. You've paid for it, you want to use it. So we found ourselves asking a question we never expected to ask. And that is, does owning a second home support the life that we actually want? Or does it quietly anchor us to one destination and then perhaps one way of living when in fact we are craving more? As you've probably guessed, we're currently in Spain. See flamingos, giraffes and camper vans, and otters and surfboards. I don't know either. Since we've been here, we've had the house valued for the first time in a decade. And that is really taking that conversation about what do we want beyond conversation, beyond theory, if you like, into action. So don't get too excited. It's just one valuation of several that we intend to get. And we will absolutely make a decision based on more information, not just that one valuation. But for the first time, I think what that's done for us is it's given us some real numbers to work with. And suddenly this isn't just a conversation over a glass of wine anymore. It's become something much more tangible, something measurable. And we have now started doing the sums with the Spanish property in mind. Things like, what will we actually be left with after things like the estate agent fees have gone, any Spanish legal costs, and we have taxes that we'll have to pay, particularly capital gains tax, and there could well be some taxes that we need to pay in the UK as well. We're not sure at this point. But what it all does mean is that we can actually estimate what the sale of the property might achieve for us and for those early retirement plans. So the implications, if they're accurate, are significant. It's not life-changing in a kind of lottery win sense of the word, but it's potentially significant enough to change the trajectory of our plans. And that's got our attention, because for the first time, selling isn't feeling like giving something up. It's starting to feel like gaining something, which is a real sort of mind shift. So how does this affect our retirement timeline? Well, as many of you will know, if you watched the previous videos, we're working towards a goal. We've set our goal. It's retiring at 57 for me and 60 for Michael, my husband. So that's 2 years' time. It's a target we've spoken about often already on this channel and will continue to do so. And it's the plan that we're building towards. And when we start running the numbers from the potential sale, we've realised something. And that is that an autumn 2027 sale could fit remarkably well into that timeline. Now, That's based on one valuation, as I said before, and there's plenty of assumptions that we need to make, so nothing's guaranteed. But if the figures stack up and future evaluations support what we've been told, it could become the retirement unlock that we've been looking for. It could help us keep firmly on track and reach our target of 57 and 60. And this is where it gets really interesting, because for us, retiring early isn't about escaping work, or maybe a little bit, but it's about truly buying back time, and that is time to do more travel, time to explore, time to take on those adventures that we've talked about for years, and time to make the most of what you often hear described as the go-go years, you know, those healthy, active years ahead. And at the same time, life becomes significantly simpler for us because we'll have one home instead of two. Again, first world problems, we get it. But that means one set of bills, one set of insurance, one set of expected repairs, less admin, less complexity, and fewer moving parts. And from a purely practical perspective, our head looks at all of that and says, well, that makes a lot of sense. But here's the problem. We're in Spain, as I said before. We came back, we opened the door, we opened the shutters, we sat on the terrace, we've been to our favourite places since we've been out here. We've enjoyed the sunshine, and sorry for everybody at home, but of course the aircon. And suddenly the spreadsheet starts losing the argument, you know, because this place doesn't feel like a financial asset when you're here. It feels like our home, and not only our home, but after 10 years, this place has become woven into the fabric of our lives. We know where we like to eat, we know where we like to walk, we know where we like to buy our coffee, we know where we like to watch the sunset, and all of those things that you would expect from becoming really familiar with a place and falling in love with it. Which means that there are memories attached at every corner. After a decade, we're not simply visiting Spain anymore. We belong here, after a fashion, I guess, but we feel we belong here in a way that we never expected when we first bought the property. And that's when the heart starts taking over the conversation, because once it's sold, it's sold. And no spreadsheet can calculate the value of memories. However, with all of that said, autumn 2027 feels increasingly likely as a time to sell. And why is that? Well, we've had some interesting advice from the people that know the local property market. And one piece of advice that keeps turning up is we've been told that, and this makes sense, that summer viewings often attract the dreamers. You know, those people that are on holiday, that have got very excited by the idea of owning a property overseas and start making some inquiries, or they're the ones looking in the estate agent's windows. Makes sense, right? They start imagining their life abroad and they want to continue that feeling of being on holiday. But there's more serious buyers apparently turn up in the autumn. They're the people that have done their research, they've got their funds together, they know what they want and are genuinely ready to buy. And strangely enough, I think that advice has given us some clarity, because if we're honest, we're not quite ready yet. Nearly, but not quite. We've already committed to having a Christmas out here with family and New Year. And deep down, I think we'd quite like one more fabulous summer to enjoy. One more summer of those morning coffees on the terrace, you know, one more summer of family visits and enjoying everything that we spent these last 10 years building. So one more summer of making memories that of course will pay us dividends in the future. So whilst no final decision has been made, and whilst we need those further valuations and get to understand what the average might be before we make any major decision, if we do decide to sell in autumn of 27, it's increasingly looking like the right time frame, which interestingly could align beautifully with the retirement plans as well. So the more that we've discussed this, the more we've realised that we're probably asking the wrong question. The question isn't, should we sell the house? The question is, what do we want the after party years to look like? Because every major decision we make now is going to be shaping that future. Every pound, every year, every commitment and every opportunity. If we'd only owned the property a year or two, then maybe this would be a much easier decision. But after 10 years, we're not simply deciding whether to sell a house, we're deciding to sell a chapter of our lives. It's not just bricks and mortar now. So whether that dream suited us 10 years ago and is still the dream that suits us now, that's the question. What does freedom mean? Is freedom having a home in the sun, waiting for us for whenever we want it, whenever we want to come out here? Or is freedom having fewer commitments and more flexibility? Is freedom a destination? Or is freedom the ability to choose a new destination every time? Maybe that's the real dilemma, because we've achieved one dream and now we're trying to work out whether we're brave enough to pursue the next one. So that's where we are right now. You know, for 10 years, as we said, this house has been a huge part of our lives. It's given us the sunshine, the memories, the friendships and experiences that we'll always treasure. So the question isn't whether buying was the right decision. We know that it was. The real question is whether keeping it for another 10 years is the right decision. You know, our head sees autumn 2027, which will help us keep on track for that retirement goal of 57 and 60. You know, simpler finances and just one home instead of two, and maybe more flexibility and more opportunities to travel. But maybe even finally tackling that backpacking adventure though, that Central and South America piece that we've talked about since the very first episode of the After Party Years. Our heart sees something different, and a place that we genuinely love, a place that's full of memories, a place that's become part of who we are. And that's why this isn't an easy decision, because neither choice is wrong. They're simply two very different futures. What we do know is this: every time we are in the UK, selling feels like the obvious answer because there's distance. Every time we are here in Spain, keeping it feels like the obvious answer. Maybe that's why this decision is so tricky. You know, the after parties we know aren't about standing still. They're about intentionally choosing what comes next. And right now we're trying to decide what that next chapter should look like. So what would you do? I'm intrigued to know. Given the same dilemma, would you keep the Spanish home, or would you sell it and simplify your life and stay on track for an early retirement, embracing a future filled with, hopefully, lots of adventure? Indeed, have you had a similar dilemma, and what did you do? Please let us know in the comments, because we're intrigued and, quite frankly, feel a bit alone in making this decision at the moment. But as always, whatever happens next and what decision we make, we will share the journey with you here on the After Party Years. And again, if this is something you're interested in, if this is part of your decision making, if you're thinking about early retirement, then please hit like, hit subscribe, share your comments, and we'll see you next time on the After Party Years. Bye.